Carl Jung once suggested that the most powerful transformations in our lives do not begin with what happens outside of us, but with something shifting quietly within. And if you're hearing this right now, there is a strong possibility that such a shift has already begun inside you, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that changes everything beneath the surface. Because what you're experiencing is not just about another person. It is about a movement in your own psyche. Something in you has started to withdraw from what no longer feels aligned. And even if you cannot fully explain it yet, they can feel it. There is a subtle change in your energy, almost like a current that no longer flows toward them in the same way. And strangely, without words, without explanation, they are reacting to it. Not because they suddenly understand everything, but because something essential in the connection has shifted. Jung would say that when the unconscious begins to reorganize itself, the external world reflects that change in unexpected ways. And what you're witnessing now is one of those reflections. Before we go any further, there is something you need to hear clearly. What you felt between you and this person was real. It was never something you imagined out of loneliness or hope. You were not too sensitive, not too emotional, not reading too much into things. The confusion you experienced did not come from illusion, but from inconsistency, the closeness that turned into distance, the warmth that suddenly became silence, the moments where everything felt undeniable, followed by moments where nothing made sense. That tension is what unsettled you, not because you were wrong, but because you were perceiving something real that was never fully acknowledged. You may have noticed patterns that felt almost impossible to explain. They would appear close, engaged, present, and then without warning, withdraw into distance. They would respond just enough to keep something alive, but never enough to give it clarity. And just when you began to step back, to detach, to stop trying so hard, they would reappear, almost as if something inside them could not tolerate your absence. This is not random behavior. It follows a psychological pattern that Carl Jung would recognize deeply. Jung believed that every meaningful relationship acts as a mirror. Not a simple reflection of what is visible, but a deeper mirror that reveals parts of ourselves we have not yet fully seen. When someone enters your life in a way that feels intense, confusing, or transformative, it is often because they are touching something within your unconscious. And at the same time, you're doing the same for them. You're not just interacting with each other's personalities, but with each other's hidden layers, the parts that are usually kept out of awareness. This is where the concept of the shadow becomes important. According to Jung, the shadow is the part of ourselves we have learned to hide, suppress, or deny. It contains not only what we consider negative, but also what we fear expressing, including vulnerability, desire, and emotional truth. When you entered their life, you did not just meet their surface. You activated something deeper, something they were not entirely ready to face. And when that happens, the psyche does something very predictable. It defends itself, not because it does not care, but because it cares in a way that feels overwhelming. Instead of moving closer with honesty, it creates distance, not as rejection, but as protection. Admitting what they feel would mean losing control over it. And for many people, that loss of control feels more threatening than the possibility of losing the connection itself. So they retreat, They become inconsistent. They create ambiguity, not because the feeling is not there, but because it is too present, too real, too difficult to manage within the structure of who they believe themselves to be. This is what Jung described as the tension between persona and shadow. The persona is the version of ourselves we show to the world, the identity we have learned to maintain. The shadow is everything that does not fit into that identity. And when someone triggers the shadow, it creates internal conflict. You may have sensed this without understanding it. Moments where they seemed genuine, open, almost vulnerable, followed by moments where they pulled back and acted as if nothing had happened. It is not that one version was real and the other was false. Both were real. They were simply unable to reconcile them. And instead of integrating those parts, they oscillated between them. Now, something important happened when you began to change. When you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to hold the connection together on your own, a shift occurred. Not just externally, but energetically. Your attention, your emotional investment, your presence, all of it began to return to you, and that absence was felt. It is similar to being in a room where a constant warmth has always been present. You may not notice it while it is there, but the moment it disappears, the absence becomes undeniable. That is what they experienced, not because you disappeared completely, but because you were no longer reaching in the same way. You were still there, but you were no longer waiting. And this is where another psychological response begins to emerge, what we might call attachment activation. When someone senses that they may be losing access to a connection they had unconsciously relied on, something inside them becomes alert. Not always consciously, not always in a way they can articulate, but it manifests in behavior. They begin to check, to observe, to reappear in subtle ways. They look at your profile. They notice your activity. They become aware of your absence in ways they were not before. They might send a message that seems casual, almost insignificant, but carries a deeper intention, not necessarily to reconnect fully, but to test the space, to see if you're still there in the way you used to be. This is often misunderstood as manipulation, but it is more accurate to understand it as a form of indirect communication. When someone is unable to express their feelings directly, they communicate through behavior, through small signals, through presence without clarity, through actions that say what words cannot. Jung described a similar mechanism called projection. When a person is not ready to face what they feel internally, they externalize it. They may begin to interpret your behavior in ways that reflect their own internal conflict. They might make you feel as if you're the one who is too much, too emotional, too invested. But in reality, they are responding to something within themselves that they have not yet integrated. Take a moment now and place your hand on your chest. Feel your heartbeat. That rhythm has been there through every moment of confusion, every moment of doubt, every moment you questioned yourself. Your body has always known the truth before your mind tried to explain it away. The discomfort you felt was not irrational. It was information, because the unconscious does not speak in logical arguments. It speaks in sensations, in emotions, in subtle signals that we often ignore because they do not fit neatly into explanation. But Jung emphasized that these signals are essential. They are the language of the deeper self. As you began to listen, even without realizing it, you started to withdraw your energy from what no longer felt aligned, not in anger, not in rejection, but in quiet recognition. And that recognition is what created the shift. Here is the part that changes everything. The behaviors you are observing from them now, the checking, the small messages, the indirect contact, these are not random actions. They are the closest form of confession that fear allows. They are attempts to reconnect without vulnerability, to reach without fully exposing themselves. Because direct honesty would require them to confront what they feel, and that is exactly what they have been avoiding. So instead, they circle the connection. They approach it carefully, indirectly, testing whether it is still safe to step closer. But this is not about them anymore. This is the turning point. Because while you were trying to understand their behavior, something else was happening within you. You were changing, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, in ways that are more powerful than any reaction. You began to realize that peace is not something another person gives you. It is something you choose. You began to see that clarity does not come from their words, but from your own awareness. And perhaps without fully deciding it, you stopped abandoning yourself in order to maintain the connection. That is the true transformation. And it is not visible in the way you speak or act. It is something deeper, a shift in identity, a movement toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself, rather than seeking completion through another. And when that process begins, everything changes. Not because the other person changes immediately, but because your relationship to the situation changes. You are no longer trying to decode every signal. You are no longer measuring your worth through their responses. You are no longer waiting for clarity to come from outside. You become still, not passive, not indifferent, but grounded. And that stillness has a different quality. It is not empty, it is full. It carries a sense of self that does not depend on outcome. This is what creates what might seem like a paradox. The moment you stop chasing is the moment something begins to move again, not because you're playing a strategy, but because you're no longer participating in the dynamic that kept things unbalanced. And from here, everything that follows will reveal something deeper, not just about them, but about you. As you continue on this path, something subtle but undeniable begins to unfold within you. The confusion that once consumed your thoughts starts to dissolve into clarity, not because they explained anything, not because the situation suddenly made sense, but because you're no longer trying to force meaning out of inconsistency. You begin to see the connection from a distance, almost as if you are observing it rather than being trapped inside it. And in that distance, something becomes visible that you could not see before. You begin to understand that what held you there was not only the person, but the emotional investment, the projections, the meaning you attach to every moment, every word, every silence. Jung spoke about how we do not fall in love only with the person in front of us, but with the image we unconsciously build around them. That image is shaped by our desires, our unmet needs, and the parts of ourselves we have not yet fully integrated. And when that image begins to dissolve, it can feel like losing something real, even if what we are losing is the illusion that sustained the connection. This is why letting go feels so difficult. It is not simply about releasing a person, but about releasing a version of yourself that existed within that dynamic. the version of you that waited, that hoped, that tried to make sense of what could not be made stable. And as you let that version go, something else begins to emerge. A version of you that is no longer defined by uncertainty. But this process is not linear. There will be moments when you feel strong, clear, grounded, and then moments where doubt returns. Moments where memories resurface, where you question whether you made the right decision, where you feel the pull to go back into the familiar pattern. This is part of the process. Jung emphasized that growth always involves tension. The movement between old patterns and new awareness is not a failure, it is integration in progress. Because what you are doing is not just letting go externally. You are confronting parts of yourself internally. The parts that feared abandonment, the parts that sought validation, the parts that equated intensity with meaning. These are not weaknesses. They are aspects of your psyche that are asking to be understood rather than suppressed. And this is where the concept of the shadow returns, but now in a different way. Earlier, the shadow appeared in the other person, in their avoidance, their inconsistency, their inability to face what they felt. Now it appears within you, in the form of emotions you may not want to feel: fear, sadness, even anger. But Jung would say these emotions are not obstacles, they are messages. They are guiding you toward parts of yourself that need attention, not rejection. When you allow yourself to feel them without trying to escape, something shifts. The energy that was once tied to the other person begins to return to you. Your creativity, your clarity, your sense of direction, all of it starts to reemerge. It is as if parts of you that were dormant begin to come back to life. This is what Jung referred to as the return to the self. Not the ego, not the identity shaped by others, but the deeper center of who you are. The part that exists independently of any relationship. And as you reconnect with that center, you begin to realize something fundamental. Peace was never something they could give you. It was something you temporarily lost connection with. Now, something else begins to happen. The same behaviors you once tried to decode no longer have the same effect on you. If they reach out, you notice it, but it does not destabilize you. If they disappear again, it does not create the same level of anxiety. Not because you no longer care, but because your sense of self is no longer dependent on their consistency. This is what creates a true shift in dynamic, not manipulation, not strategy, but transformation. When your internal state changes, the entire relational field changes with it. Jung might describe this as a shift in psychic energy. What you invest your energy into determines the structure of your experience. And when you withdraw that energy from what no longer aligns, it creates space. That space is often what we fear the most. We interpret it as emptiness, as loss, as something missing. But in reality, it is potential. It is the space where something new can emerge. Not necessarily another person immediately, but a deeper understanding of yourself. Think of it like standing in a river. As long as you hold onto a rock, you remain stuck in one place. The current continues to move, but you do not. Letting go feels dangerous at first, because it requires trusting something you cannot fully control. But once you release your grip, you realize the current is not working against you. It is carrying you forward. This is the nature of life. And this is what Jung referred to when he spoke about synchronicity. The idea that when you align with your inner truth, external events begin to reflect that alignment in ways that feel almost meaningful beyond coincidence. Opportunities appear. People enter your life. Situations unfold that seem to match your internal state. But this does not happen because the universe is rewarding you in a simple sense. It happens because you're no longer resisting what needs to change. You're no longer forcing something to remain that has already completed its role in your life. And this brings us to an important question. How do you know when it is truly time to let go? The answer is not found in logic, not in what others tell you. It is found in your intuition. That quiet inner voice that does not shout, but remains consistent. The feeling that something no longer flows the way it once did. The sense that you are holding on to something that is no longer holding you in the same way. Jung believed that intuition is one of the most direct ways the unconscious communicates with us. But the difficulty is that we often ignore it. We override it with reasoning, with hope, with fear of loss. We stay because leaving feels uncertain, even if staying feels painful. But there comes a moment when that internal voice becomes too clear to ignore. And in that moment, you're faced with a choice. Not between them and you, but between who you were and who you are becoming. Letting go, then, is not an act of rejection. It is an act of alignment. It is choosing to no longer invest in what contradicts your sense of self. It is recognizing that love does not require you to abandon your own peace. And this is where something profound begins to happen. As you continue to choose yourself, your energy stabilizes. The constant tension that once drained you begins to fade. The emotional highs and lows begin to level out. In their place, something quieter emerges. A sense of steadiness. A sense of being grounded within yourself. This is what the spiritual dimension of this process truly is. Not something abstract or mystical, but a return to balance. A reconnection with your own essence. The part of you that has always known what is right for you, even when you did not listen. It is important to understand that letting go does not erase what happened. It does not mean the connection was meaningless. On the contrary, it means honoring it for what it was, recognizing the role it played in your growth, the way it revealed parts of you that needed to be seen. Every meaningful relationship, as Jung suggested, acts as a teacher, not always in a gentle way, but in a way that brings awareness. And the lesson is not always about the other person. Often, it is about you, about what you accept, what you tolerate, what you believe you deserve. And as you integrate that lesson, something changes in the way you relate to others. You no longer seek connections that create confusion. You are drawn toward what feels stable, mutual, real, not because you force it, but because your internal standard has shifted. You begin to attract differently, not through effort, but through alignment. Because when you are connected to yourself, you no longer resonate with what requires you to disconnect from yourself. At this point, something else becomes clear. Letting go was never about losing them. It was about finding yourself. It was about reclaiming the parts of you that were given away in the attempt to maintain something that could not sustain itself. And in that realization, something powerful emerges. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from detachment alone, but the kind that comes from understanding. You see the connection for what it was. You appreciate it without needing to hold on to it. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that you were never lacking. You were never incomplete. You were simply in a situation that made you forget. Now you remember. You remember your value not as something to prove, but as something inherent. You remember your capacity to feel deeply, not as a weakness, but as a strength. You remember that love, real love, does not create constant confusion. It does not require you to question your worth. And as you stand in that awareness, you become different, not hardened, not closed, but clear, open, but grounded, willing to connect, but not at the cost of yourself. This is the transformation Jung spoke about. Not a change in circumstance, but a change in consciousness. A movement from unconscious patterns into conscious choice. And from this place, everything that comes next will be different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. So now, there is only one question left. What are you ready to release? And more importantly, who are you ready to become once you do? Because letting go is not the end of your story. It is the moment your story truly begins.